Give me a sense of where the polls are at overall.
Trump is very, very good at lying, and he's also very, very good at pandering.
So I don't think Trump and Vance are going to change strategy because so far that has worked for them.
I'd love to be an elephant.
Hello and welcome to American Friction, the weekly US politics podcast out every Friday from the makers of Oh God What Now, The Bunker and Paper Cuts. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
That's right, he is. And that is two first names. You heard it correct. But I don't have two first names. My name's Chris Jones. Every week in the run-up to November's US presidential election, we'll be getting right stuck in to the latest campaign stories, conspiracy theories, and polling on US politics, and telling you why it all matters. And helping to guide us through is Rolling Stone magazine politics reporter Nikki McCann Ramírez. Hello, Nikki. How are you?
Hello, boys. I'm chuffed.
Excellent. Nikki, I've been watching The Rings of Power Season 2 from the Lord of the Rings universe, Middle-earth. I'm a bit of a nerd around that. If you were to be a race, or even, if you want to go further, a character from Middle-earth, who would you be?
Oh, I would absolutely be a hobbit, like, hands down. That seems so fun. I get to live in a little hole. I get to be grouchy when people come annoy me at my house. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, they all own property, hobbits.
Yeah.
You don't really
They do,
see, there's no hobbit landlords, so I think that's
It's all
quite
very
good.
idyllic as well, isn't it? It's all very nice. What about you, Jov? What would you be?
I would be, I think I'd like to be some sort of elf, but that sounds arrogant to say, so I think I'd go with some sort of one of the not really hard orcs, like one of the ones that goes, meat's back on the menu, boys. Like,
Right.
I'd be one of
Like
that
Shag
tier.
Rat.
Yeah. Shagrat, exactly. Yeah, I know the names and everything.
Yeah, he's the one who gets stabbed by Shelob. No, he doesn't.
Okay.
He captures Frodo.
Okay, well, clearly no one knows more about Lord of the Rings than you, so who do you want to be?
I'd love to be an elephant. They're
Okay,
just
what's
like those
that?
massive fuck-off elephants.
Oh, okay.
That the
Ent.
Easterlings from Rune ride on.
Okay.
They're pretty cool.
Really ran out of creativity there, didn't he, when he was thinking of a name for the big elephants?
He just stuck an O,
Oliphant.
get rid of the E, stick an O in.
Well, anyway, let's go back to the script, which is...
Sorry, I just need to interject here for a second. Why is no one a massive eagle?
Ooh.
We're doing a podcast about American politics.
Don't bring up the
true.
Eagles. We'll get into a whole horrible load of trouble.
I didn't know there were massive eagles.
Well, yeah.
What? Okay, Jarv.
Are there?
What
There's
the hell?
massive
Yes!
eagles.
The thing that there's like ring raves are on and
behave
shit.
yourself. You know that.
No.
the one that
The ring
saves-
rates are something else. The Nazgul are something completely different.
Completely different.
The bird saves Gandalf.
You know what an eagle is, you idiot.
Yeah, but I didn't know there was a big one in Lord of the Rings. Right.
There are not just one. There are
Loads
several.
of them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just
Big uns.
Yeah, look, it's just not my brand of nerd. Anyway, moving on to what is my brand of nerd, this damn show. So in this
Hell yeah.
episode, we're going to be discussing where the race is at with less than 50 days to go until the big vote in November. What key moments do we need to look out for? What issues will each candidate be focusing on? And which issues do they actually need to be focusing on?
That's right. And we'll be speaking to Jon Ralston, editor and founder of the Nevada Independent, on why Nevada could be a key state in deciding the results of the presidential election.
Then we'll round up any other weird bits of news that you need to understand, looking at the federal rates cut as one of them and the MAGA Civil War latest. Welcome back. You're listening to American Friction. On to the show, it is less than 50 days until Election Day, so we thought it would be a good time to take a wide look at the state of play, what events are due that matter, and what each candidate will be prioritising. Chris.
Hello.
We're flipping the show around today, and we're coming to you first to do the number time that normally comes at the end.
Number time.
Give me a sense of where the polls are at overall. Give me a sense of where the polls are at overall.
I'll give you a sense overall of where the polls are at. So it's pretty much tied, or at very best, very close. So some of the polls I looked at for this, 538 has Harris up by 3.3% as of September 19th. ABC News /Ipsos has it with all US adults. They have that at 50% Harris and 46% Trump.
Okay.
And a poll by Reuters Ipsos, Harris leads again, 47% to 42%. All of these are around the margin of error, though. There's no real clear cut lead for Harris, although if you look at most of the polls, Harris is leading on average. But to bet on the race outcome right now based on the polls would be a pretty silly move.
So the swing states, then, that's what we need to be digging down into if we can't really tell a lot from the polling overall nationally. So give me a little bit of the numbers around them.
Well, it's exactly the same again as I read last week. They're all within the margin of error pretty much. Harris has pulled it back pretty significantly from where Biden was losing out to Trump in the swing states, because it was looking as though Trump was taking all of the swing states before Biden dropped out. Now Biden's dropped out. Harris has regained a lot of momentum for the Democratic Party, and it's all within the margin of error. Or Harris or Trump is leading. So it's pretty tight. What I will point out, though, when it comes to some of the swing states, is if you look at the polling, even if there's a big gap between the candidates, it's not necessarily going to be what the official outcome is going to be when the results come in November. So we should caution people about paying too much attention to the polls. For example, in Wisconsin, which is one of the swing states this time around as well, Hillary Clinton had a final polling average in 2016, which was 6 points above Trump, according to 538, and that was well outside of the margin of error there. But when the actual results came in, Trump won by, he was on 47.2% compared to Clinton's 46.5%. And that was fairly similar in 2020 as well. Yeah. Biden had a healthy 6% point lead in the polls and only took the state by 0.8%. So it's very close right now in all of the swing states, and a lot could change very quickly.
I wrote about Wisconsin a little bit when I was at Newsweek, and that was all largely due to late-breaking voters. So basically just undecideds and people who didn't know what they're doing, just at the end completely could flip it, really.
And that looks like what it's going to be in this election as well. There's a lot of people who are undecided, especially since Biden dropped out and a new nominee came in, because a lot of people didn't know what Harris stood for. Which was showed in a lot of the polls and still being showed in the polls. But what we can see as well is that people, as they've got to know Harris and as they've got to know what she stands for and how she talks and how she carries herself and what kind of president she's likely to be, her popularity has just skyrocketed, as I mentioned last week.
Nikki, then, with that and on the change of candidate, does it feel like everyone is as enthusiastic about Harris as they were at first? Or is that kind of honeymoon, or whatever you want to call it, that bump starting to wane a bit now?
Yeah, I think the post-nuptial glow has faded a bit. We are now deep in campaign season. I think the newness of Harris has largely worn off, and she now really has to compete for those breaking news cycle moments, especially since Trump and Vance have been absolutely on one the last 2 weeks. And I also think now, sort of that time period she had where a lot of the media, a lot of voters were willing to be generous about, what are her policy positions, the interviews, all that kind of thing. That sort of period of grace has waned a bit, and again, like we said at the beginning, less than 50 days until the election, it's pedal to the metal time. You're going to see a lot of campaigning. We're coming up on October. That usually entails the famed October surprise in an American election, where parties, candidates, research groups will drop all the really nasty oppo research they've been saving until the very end. If people recall 2016, the pussy tape was the big October surprise that election cycle. So it's going to get messy. It's going to get sloppy. The polls are going to get scary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're now deep in sort of your standard race mode. That sort of glow of newness, it's no longer new.
Yeah, it feels like we're really out of the kind of brat summer period that happened for her, where everyone was just like, she's a meme, she's great, and she's better than that guy. Now everyone's gone, well, I've forgotten about that guy. who is she? And that seems to be coming to the fore a lot more. So when it comes to...
What kind of fall are we having? If Brad Summer's over,
Brad
what is
Summer's
our
over.
fall?
What would I be going for? I'd be going for Weatherspoon's fall, really.
Weatherspoon's fall.
Yeah.
Wow,
Chip,
you can do
just-
better than that.
Just staying inside.
Fuller's fall?
And Fuller's fall, maybe. I'd just be,
Fuller's is a brand of pub,
staying inside.
A brand of pub. Okay.
Reading
which is probably the most British thing I think I've ever said.
reading stuff, eating chips, and drinking mead or
hell
whatever else. But mead, yeah, honey mead. Anyway, so those gaps in policy, then the big questions for her. Where do you think they really are? Where does she need to fill in the blanks in the most kind of pressing sort of sense?
I'm sorry, I'm not over the fact that you're like a medieval peasant. Sorry. Okay.
That's England, man.
Mead. But no, gaps in polling. There's a couple things here. I think she's still really struggling with her economic messaging, even though I do think economics-wise she does have a very strong policy platform that is going to appeal to sort of middle class, younger voters. I think everything she's put out about helping small businesses, helping first-time home buyers, child tax credits, all those kinds of things are really aimed toward, Gen Z, who's now like entering into that age that millennials were in the last two election cycles. They're graduating college, looking to start families, looking to buy houses, and like start small businesses. Those policies are really engineered toward that demographic group. I think they are really making a play for younger voters who this might be their first or second election, who have maybe been apathetic over the last 10 years amidst all this political chaos where everything feels incredibly cynical. They're really trying to pull them into the fold. But at the same time, you still have a Republican Party that is making economics and sort of this idea that like the American economy is an absolute shambles a central focus of their campaign. And as it tends to go, the incumbent party takes a perception and a polling hit regarding the state of the economy during election cycles. It's generally perceived that the party in power is blamed more for the current economic state than the party out of power. So she's at a disadvantage there. I also think it's been an issue. It remains an issue. It's probably going to become more of an issue, is Gaza and the war in the Middle East. She really risks alienating portions of the left with her policy in Gaza. We saw on Thursday, a couple hours before we recorded the podcast, that the uncommitted movement, which managed to pull tons of voters away from Biden in critical swing states during the Democratic primaries, has said that they're not endorsing Harris. They've also advised supporters not to vote for Trump, not to vote third party, but they've come out and said that the lack of engagement Harris has had with their demands, the lack of willingness to make a shift in her policy toward Gaza and Israel has made what was the quote? Has made it, quote, impossible for them to endorse her. Yeah. So that's becoming an issue, especially in these critical swing states like Michigan, Minnesota, states with like a high population of Middle Eastern immigrants who feel that the Democratic Party has kind of abandoned them. And then I think border and immigration policy is also still going to be that gap. And again, these are kind of the issues that we've been discussing the last couple months. We've seen over these last 2 weeks that, like we said, that initial glow of Harris has faded. Trump and Vance have come back full force with their fear-mongering about immigration and the border, and we're going to talk about it a little later in the episode. But Republicans are still dominating that conversation. And I don't think it's enough for the Harris campaign to just say, hey, like, Biden and I negotiated this really robust bill that Republicans killed because it was beneficial to Trump to kill it. Yeah. She really has to like dig down into that messaging and talk about what she's actually going to do to fix the immigration system. Because so far, the line that's really been put out is like, oh, we tried, but like Republicans blocked it. And that's not enough. That's not going to be enough.
It feels to me like Harris is she's making a bit of a gamble by not taking any gambles, if that makes sense as well. Like she's kind of not being bold. She's being incredibly cautious here.
Yeah,
do you
she's
think,
making a play for the center.
Yeah, and do you think that in itself, that's a gamble in and of itself, like not taking a gamble? There could be politically, it might make sense for her to have a bolder stance, upset some people in a way that clearly, and that's maybe where she's so opposed to the opposition, is because they don't care about upsetting anyone, but the people who they care about making happy, they're making like almost 100% happy. Whereas Harris is in this weird sort of not wanting to risk alienating potential undecided voters, but that actually may be making more people become undecided voters.
Part of Democrats' strategy in this election cycle is banking on sort of the wave of backlash to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the state-level policies targeting abortion rights and reproductive rights, to put a ton of momentum behind them. But like you said, Jarv, at the same time, while they're really strong on those issues and they've taken a really forceful stance there, because that stance pisses off Republicans.
Sure.
She has been exerting what I think is an unnecessary level of caution on things like the war between Israel and Hamas. At this point, and Chris can fact check me on the polling here, I think it's something of upwards of 60% of Americans think that like the US can take a harder stance toward Israel. An overwhelming majority of Americans now support more intense measures to bring the war to an end. Like, the support for an arms embargo is growing. And the reality is that it wouldn't be that upsetting to people if she took a harder stance on the Netanyahu government, which we've talked about before, is incredibly unpopular in Israel. We saw over the last couple days this pager attack in Lebanon, which injured thousands of civilians and was seemingly carried out by Israeli intelligence forces. That also risks expanding that war to the wider region. And I think the last thing Americans want, and a lot of Israel's European allies want, is for this war to spill over into Lebanon. So at this point, the United States is in a position of strength to exert pressure on Israel to be like, hey, like, it's been more than a year or almost more than a year. Time to cut it out. Like, we're not going to keep funding or supporting this. And I don't know. Again, I think you're completely correct that this risks alienating portions of her base who would otherwise vote for her.
I mean, with this, Nikki, is this also actually kind of not just on that issue, but on a raft of issues, and just in terms of the tactics, it feels like Harris is basically using the exact same playbook which Biden and Hillary Clinton tried to use as well, which just seems to be, well, those guys are so bad and you don't want them. I'm here. And that just seems, I don't know what you think. It feels like that worked for Biden last time out because it's going to work a few times. But doing that again does just feel a little bit tired to me. And it also seems like that is what's making her reinvention fall off too, because she can't say, hey, I'm not Biden now, I'm me, but then go, I'm just going to run the exact same campaign that Biden ran a few years ago.
I would slightly disagree.
That's okay.
I don't think she's necessarily running the Biden-Hillary strategy. I think she's trying to run more of an Obama strategy.
Okay.
In the sense that so much of her messaging has been very similar to sort of the yes, we can mantra, you know, the like, we're not going back, we're looking forward, this is a country of progress and possibilities. Of course, she has talked about, like, she has to talk about her opponent and the fact that, like, he is a threat to democracy, all of the policies he's planning on putting into place. But unlike Biden and Hillary, who I think did have less of an actual, like, policy counter strategy, Harris is running on a much more, like, how do I phrase this correctly? Harris is running a campaign that is much more centered, much more directly focused on the needs and desires of the middle class and working Americans than Biden and Hillary were. Biden and Hillary, I think, both ran very, like, ideological campaigns in the sense that it was juxtaposing candidates who had a lot of respect for institutions and democracy and were talking, about like the threat of violence and the extremism that Trump embodied. And Harris, throughout her campaign, she's dealt with Trump in a way that I think is very different from Biden and Clinton. She isn't giving him the time of day on a lot of things. There are a lot of things that Trump does that are just bait to get his opponents to engage with him, to keep the conversation on him, to make the entire race a referendum on Trump. And I think there's no beating the reality that, at least in some significant portion, this race is a referendum on Trump.
Yeah.
But what I think Harris is trying to do is say it's not just about what he's going to do, it's about what I can offer you instead, which I think was messaging that was missing in some way, shape, or form from Biden and Clinton's campaign. And I think those two campaigns were also incredibly different. I think Biden had strengths that Hillary did not have. But I do think Harris is trying to split away, at least campaign strategy-wise, from what Biden was doing. But then you are correct, where she has split from that campaign strategy, but in a lot of ways, she is still running a lot of the same policies that Biden was, even though she's marketing them more. Does that make sense?
Don't know about you, John.
I am correct.
You are. Very good. I was going to say, I don't know about you, but every time Nikki said the word referendum, I flinched a bit.
Oh,
Didn't
yeah.
like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, you guys have PTSD.
That was me hissing down the mic.
Very nice. Chris,
Hello.
giving you some time to hiss, then
Thanks,
where are the public's priorities at then? Because we spoke a little bit about where Harris is putting hers, but actually what's the state of the nation?
It hasn't really changed much at all.
It's money.
It's inflation, the economy, which is kind of tied together.
Stupid.
Immigration, and violent crime. But if you look at the attitudes on all of these issues, according to Ipsos, the American public trust Harris when it comes to protecting American democracy and appointments to the U.S. court. But when it comes to money and immigration, for example, sorting the issues with at the U.S.-Mexico border, for example, they trust Trump more, which is really interesting if you look at the polling, because it shows Harris in the lead. But when it comes to the biggest issues that a lot of Americans are talking about, they trust Trump more. I just think that's a really interesting job.
That has
it is
also been a
interesting.
trend in American politics throughout history. Republicans tend to poll more favorably when it comes to like economics and the border, usually because historically they're border hawks, but also a lot of the traditional Republican ideology has been centered around this idea of like fiscal responsibility, small government, anti-debt, la 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 la.
Yeah.
I suppose it also goes back to the point that you made earlier, Nikki, in terms of if something's going wrong, it's the government's fault.
Yeah.
And that will impact the polling, and I think that's probably what we're seeing here as well.
Well, I've had enough of talking about attitudes, and I've had enough of both of your attitudes.
Yours stinks
so
as
let's
well.
move on to talk about someone else with a bloody bad attitude, Donald Trump.
I've been so nice to you this episode. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I know. I love you both, really. I'm sorry.
We love you too, Jarv.
Thank you, man. Chris. Talking about Trump, he basically does seem to not have anything left in order to make polls shift. Is his hope, again, similar to, the interesting thing being that I suggested that Harris was maybe running a similar campaign to Biden and Clinton, but Trump is just running the same campaign as himself over and over again. And yeah, has he just... can that work again, do you think? Or can he reinvent himself? Is he trying to reinvent himself in any way? No. Okay.
No.
There's
I
no
don't
new
think it's
Trump.
possible. I don't think he has it in him. I think what I will give Trump is he definitely has the authenticity factor, even if it hurts him in the end, because he is incapable of putting on a front for electoral purposes, of like playing a character if it means like making political gains. We've seen some kind of like desperate attempts some sort of spaghetti at the wall kind of things to try and engineer
Yum.
a little bit of policy enthusiasm. We saw the no tax on tips initiative. We saw him make that bizarre claim that he was going to make the government pay for all IVF treatments, and then nothing came of it.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll just say things being like, oh, I'm going to do this, but then there's never any follow-up.
Yeah.
I think what I can say is that he has gotten a lot more erratic over the last 2 months, and we talked a little bit about it in the bonus episode, but there are a lot of reports that the first assassination attempt against him in July and then the subsequent one that happened last week have really shaken him. We have seen him really double down on sort of the blood and soil attitude he's had toward immigration. We've talked a lot about that on this podcast. And I think, as I've said before, when Trump is caught off the back foot or finds himself in a position where he is not the dominant force, he tends to fall back on the things that he knows, the things that he is sure will get his base riled up. And that is most often immigration, crime, and the economy. And I think if you watch any of his speeches, any of its public statements, they're just hammering that 24/7. And I think one of the most horrendous things we've seen in the past couple weeks that I think really embody this attitude that the Republican ticket is taking is what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have been doing and saying regarding those false rumors about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and pets and being undocumented, even though they have legal status. J.D. Vance said this week in an interview with CNN, I believe it was, that fundamentally he doesn't care if he has to, quote, create stories to get the media to pay attention to the issues he wants them to talk about, that he's willing to do that. And then a couple days later, it came out that Vance's office had actually reached out to officials in Springfield when he first started tweeting about this to check if there was any merit to these claims, and Springfield officials told him no. And Vance just ran with this rumor. The night his office allegedly called Springfield city officials was the night of the debate.
Yeah.
So within 24 hours, Trump had, in the debate, skyrocketed it to national issue. And now Trump has been talking about how the mass deportations might be bloody, how he's going to remove all these migrants from Springfield. They are ginning up this fear and anger and resentment toward immigrant communities that I think represents what the Republican Party wants people to have in mind when they go to the ballot box. They want them to vote with fear, with resentment, with concerns that migrants are going to come ravage their community, that Democrats support killing newborns, that if Kamala Harris is elected, this country will descend into communism. And I think the problem that Democrats encounter is that combating fear with rationality, it can sometimes be very difficult. It's very difficult to penetrate through to the public consciousness with an argument about like rational economic policies, the truth about what the loss of reproductive rights does to women in this country, that immigrants are by and large like good people who contribute to society and help make this country better. It is really hard to penetrate into the public consciousness with that when you have the other party screaming about how immigrants and the economy and everyone's trying to kill you. And so I don't think Trump and Vance are going to change strategy because so far that has worked for them and they know it's effective and they know that they don't have to actually present anything concrete to their base. They just need to make their base scared of the opposite party.
Nevada only has 6 electoral college votes, and while that's a relatively small number, they could prove crucial.
Nevada is a swing state, and the winner of the Silver State has gone on to become president 10 times out of the last 12 presidential elections. So it's really, really important. Here to discuss Nevada's politics, who's doing well in the state, and on what issues votes will be won there, is Jon Ralston, founder and editor of the Nevada Independent. Hi, Jon.
How are you?
Very well. How are you, Jov?
Yeah, very good, very good. John, can you tell me just a bit generally about the politics of Nevada and what the average voter is like, if there is one, or if there's a few average voters, then feel free to spread out a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure if there's any such thing as an average voter anywhere in America these days, but Nevada is a very purple state, and we've been a swing state since 2008. And the state has been relatively evenly divided. The Democrats have had a slight advantage in voter registration since 2008. It's shrunk a little bit now, and that's why the Republicans are more optimistic than ever that for the first time in 20 years they can win Nevada in the presidential race. But Nevada is essentially three states. It's Las Vegas, which is in Clark County, which has about 2/3 or a little bit more of the electorate. Then you have Washoe County, which is Reno, and that has about 10 to 15%. And then there are 15 counties in between Las Vegas and Reno, and they are very, very red counties where Donald Trump will win by landslides, but it's only 10 to 12% of the vote. They're all very different places, the rural counties of Washoe County and Clark County.
So Las Vegas, then, if that is the biggest of the three, and how would you say what is the spread of voters like there?
Well, it's always been a Democratic stronghold. The Democrats have always been more populous in registration than Republicans. And that is still true today, although it's not double digits the way it used to be. The biggest force in Democratic politics here in the south of Nevada is the Culinary Union, which represents 50 to 60,000 casino workers. We're a service economy. It's a very strong union city, even though we live in what is known as a right-to-work state. And so that has a huge impact on the politics. But also, so does the fact that the city has exploded in size in the last few decades. It's not growing at the pace it once did, but it's still constantly growing, and the transient nature of the population is a challenge for both analysts and campaigns to get a handle on.
With the union influence there, then, John, can I ask something we've spoken a little bit about on the podcast is how Harris's ties to Biden might harm her in some ways. But actually, in Nevada, could they be a bit of a plus because of how strong he seems to be in terms of how he interacts with and supports unions? And he's been on picket lines, we've seen, for example, recently. So actually, is Nevada a rare place where maybe Biden is proving a real an asset to the Democrats, where he's been a bit of a weight elsewhere?
You're right about the first part of it, and Biden is very strong with unions. He has come, I think he's been on maybe even a culinary union picket line. I am trying to remember. Things move so fast here that I can't even remember when he was in the race at this point. But I don't think he's going to be helpful to the Democrats in general. His numbers in Nevada are very, very low. He and Donald Trump have about the same numbers, which is known in the political parlance as being way underwater. In other words, his disapproval rating is way higher than his approval rating. So I think Harris has to do here what she's trying to do elsewhere, which is separate herself from the man who put her on the ticket, which is no easy task.
Do you think she's been successful so far in states like Nevada in being able to separate herself from Biden's shadow, I guess? Because, you know, you look at the polling and you look at some of the numbers around this, and it shows that a lot of Americans spread right across the country see her as a Biden 2.0. Is that still the same in Nevada?
I think there are a lot of Nevadans who see her as a Biden 2.0, but Democrats, especially here, who were depressed when Biden was on the ballot. Every poll was showing Donald Trump outside the margin of error, up by 5, 6, or 7 points. And now they have taken a change and now are elated that Harris is on the ticket. They see fresh energy. The polls have gone from Trump being a few points ahead to it being a dead heat. And so I think Democrats are more energized. More volunteers have come forward for the campaign. We're still a swing state. We're still a purple state. It's still very close, but Democrats are clearly more energized than they were when Biden was the nominee.
Looking at a bit of recent history, then, what have the last couple of presidential elections looked like? First off, and then going down the ballot, is there a trend? Are we seeing there's a trend there, or does the down ballot races maybe buck what we've seen in the presidential races?
It's a good question. It's quite interesting that the last two cycles here, the race has essentially been decided by the same percentage, about 2.5 points. The Democrats have won. Hillary Clinton in 2016 won Nevada by that much, and then Joe Biden in 2020 won by 2.5 points. It was about 33,000 votes or so in 2020. There is something strange going on down ballot, though. The House races, there are 3 supposedly competitive House races, and the Republicans have essentially surrendered in those. They are not doing well. And there's a very important Senate race here as well, in which every poll has shown the incumbent, she's a first-term Senator, Jackie Rosen, well ahead of Sam Brown, the Republican nominee. And when I say well ahead, I mean many polls have shown double digits, and almost every poll has shown at least close to double digits. And I talked to my staff about this, and we are still wondering who these Trump-Rosen voters are that are wandering around this state and causing this dissonance between the top of the ticket and the Senate race.
So what do you think it is then? What are the big issues, I guess, that people in Nevada are really resonating with? I was doing some reading, and I saw one of the things that kept coming up really was inflation as one of the big issues for people in Nevada on reasoning with who they would like to vote for. So I suppose, is inflation the big one where you are? And what else are people in Nevada really looking at as the big issues in this election?
So the biggest issue here, as it is in many places across the country, is the economy, and inflation is part of it. But also a big issue here in Nevada are housing prices, which have skyrocketed across the state. People mention it when they're asked the open-ended question in polling, what's the biggest issue facing Nevada? They mention housing prices along with the economy. They far outdistance any other issues. Immigration is mentioned, even though we're not a border state, because there's a fairly sizable population of undocumented workers in Nevada. And so that affects some voters, especially, as you might imagine, on the Republican side.
With the housing side of things, this is a bit of an abstract question, but bear with me. Is that something that maybe can help Trump on one side, because he's not in charge of the economy, so he can totally blame the government as it is, but also he's quite a big picture candidate, isn't he? And what he tries to sell to his supporters, whether it's true or not, is a sort of dream and his own warped version of the American dream, and maybe things like housing and that sort of thing falls into it a little bit. So is that something that maybe works in his favor, because he will lie a bit about the economy and what he can do for Nevadans, and while the Democrats will go, we've got plans to fix inflation and to fix house prices, it takes a long time and it's quite boring to explain. And Trump won't talk about things that actually might work. He'll just talk about what he promises, which is maybe dreams, but he'll promise it.
So as you know, Trump is very, very good at lying. And he's also very, very good at pandering at this point in the campaign. And not so much on the housing issue here, but he proposed what is called his no taxes on tips plan, which he says originated from a waitress here in Nevada. Now, there's all kinds of problems with it. It's not easy to implement. It may not be good economics, but service economy, where a lot of people depend on tips, maybe it'll cut into the Democratic base, the culinary union I already mentioned. So he's certainly doing some Nevada-specific pandering, lying, whatever you want to call it.
Also, with Nevada, it's had a growing population of Latino voters. I saw a piece saying that inflation was sort of a concern of theirs as well. But generally, in terms of Trump targeting that demographic, how is his, the immigration rhetoric and everything else he's saying gonna play out when that is a growing group, and he's clearly got problems with some of those voters? It would appear.
Well, it remains to be seen, of course, and I don't like making predictions until right before the election, which I'm always crazy to do publicly, but not in the mid to late September. But Trump, they're making overt appeals to the Hispanic voters, and the Hispanic voters here will be about 20%, give or take a few points, of the electorate, using the no taxes on tips and other issues to try to say, as Trump often says about various demographic groups, how could it be worse? Why don't you just try me? I can help you. And there is evidence that Hispanics have been disproportionately hurt by the poor economy here. And so they are playing into that in a fairly overt way.
But I find it very interesting that you look at the way that Trump has described some of these immigrants from Venezuela, for example, and Haitian migrants as well. We have to add, there have been a lot of horrendous things that we've mentioned on this podcast a few times said about them, specifically in Ohio. But as we mentioned, Nevada has a growing Latino demographic. When you or your staff are speaking to people about this election, are they saying that they're feeling hurt by some of these things that are being said? And then does that then push them more towards Kamala Harris, who is, as we've mentioned, the first ever black female presidential nominee, and they might see they might be attracted to her because they can relate to some of the life experiences that she has, for example?
I think that's true among a certain cohort of Hispanics, but there are others who may not cater to that appeal or like that appeal for a variety of different reasons. The state is way too close to call right now, and that's why every kind of incursion into that demographic group by Trump is going to be significant. Now, there's also been a phenomenon here, and it's existed in some other places, where the Hispanic population, which you gentlemen know is not a monolith, but generally makes decisions very late, final decisions. So a significant number of the undecided voters, whether it's 5% or 8%, whatever's left, may be Hispanic, and how they decide based on the appeals made by Harris that you referred to or the appeals made by Trump, that's going to be very important in deciding who wins this state.
I know you've said you don't like making predictions, and my final question for you was going to be just generally your gut feeling for Nevada. So I'll still ask for that, but you don't have to answer it, your gut feeling. But there's obviously less than 50 days to go now. It's getting tighter and tighter. What could you see happening that could really tip it either way? So not necessarily having to predict the result, but are there things which could happen that you could think could flip it either way?
It's a very clever way to get around my admonition that I would not predict. I'm very impressed.
I'm cheeky.
So, listen, what's happened in American politics, as you both know, is that the unpredictable has become the norm, not the predictable, right? If you had asked me 6 months ago if Joe Biden would get out of the race and Kamala Harris, I would have thought you were crazy and never have done your podcast again. However, I have to tell you, I do think that what has been true in Nevada since 2008 cannot be denied, and that is that the Democratic turnout machine, especially in Clark County where the base is, has made the difference in these presidential races. It's why Biden and Hillary were able to win, and before them, Obama won very, very significantly in 2008 and 2012. All other things being equal in this state, I still think the slight edge goes to the Democratic machine. But the Republicans have made some inroads. They did elect a governor in 2022 for the first time in a long time, even though the Democrats did well down the ballot. And because registered independent voters are now the plurality in the state, it's not so easy to predict. So I'm going to cop out until, say, November 3rd or so.
Jon, thank you very much for playing along with me there on the prediction. Sorry for pushing you into it. Thanks so much for your time, Jon. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Into the roundup section of the show then, a few more stories to get into. Nikki, as we record, something is going on with Mark Robinson. Can you tell me and the listeners who Mark Robinson is, and then what the fuck is happening? Because it seems kind of confusing, exciting, I don't know.
It's wild. So, listeners, we're going to have to come back to y'all with a bigger update next week. But as we speak, it seems that the Republican Party of North Carolina is in absolute shambles because Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who is running in the race for the governorship, he is the Republican candidate, might need to drop out. And there are unconfirmed reports that there is a very nasty story that's about to drop upon him. Again, these are unconfirmed reports, but we're hearing it might be of a sexual nature, which is particularly interesting given that Robinson has run on a very extreme platform of like religious nativism. A lot of his campaign events are him preaching in churches, speaking to evangelical groups. He kind of rose to prominence because he has said some truly like vile and despicable things about LGBTQ people. So, you know, you have this far right Christian nationalist Republican who might need to resign because of a sex scandal is what it's looking like. But, you know, keep your eyes peeled. We'll come at you with a couple more updates when we get them.
Well, thanks for bringing that horrible person to my attention. On to something else then. Government shutdown could be on the way. How big is this? Yeah. What is it and why? This seems to be something that like doesn't really make any sense to anyone not in America because it seems to happen all the time. It's just this game of brinkmanship. It's just, can't they just make it so that not every year or so the government could shut down?
Ha 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 ha, you wish. So
how
essentially,
very British that would be.
Congress has like one major job, particularly the House of Representatives, and that is funding the government. Like,
nice.
The big thing the House of Representatives does in the United States is pass the budget, fund the government.
Mm-hmm.
What essentially happens is if they get to a point where they cannot agree on funding bills, and we can do a deeper dive on this, but there's like something like a dozen bills that have to be approved for basically each major federal agency in the country. They all need to get approved. It's usually they're called like omnibus funding bills. If
like
that doesn't happen,
I was gonna say that
like Coronation
like
Street,
Coro,
like the omnibus you watch at the weekend to catch up.
Oh, sure. I don't know. You guys live in a mystical land.
We'll do another episode about Cora as well, but back to this.
So essentially, there's a funding deadline. Basically, each bill you pass to fund the government has a deadline.
Uh-huh.
And the current funding bill expires at the end of September.
Oh, no.
If they do not pass either a whole new funding bill or what is called a continuing resolution, which is basically a resolution that says we're going to extend the previous funding legislation X amount of time, the government shuts down. What that means is that every non-essential function of the government stops operating. So national parks close. I have a big list. Let me find it for you.
Yeah, they literally just stop paying anyone.
Yeah, like millions of government workers get put on furlough. Basically, you're not working right now. We're not paying you. When the government reopens, they get back pay. But there's been shutdowns that last like months, weeks, and that can cover several pay periods. Let me think what else shuts down. A lot of just like major health services.
On that, I read that between the shutdown that was in 1995 and 1996, every day the government had been shut down, there were like 10,000 applicants to Medicare that were rejected.
Yeah,
Okay.
because a lot of the sort of bureaucratic, logistical, we approve paperwork, those things get put on pause. Let me see, what else? Being in DC in a government shutdown is incredibly depressing because DC, so many of sort of the public spaces are run by the federal government, like all the Smithsonian museums, like half of our parks are national parks. So everything just gets shut down and the city is miserable. But all across the country, you'd basically have millions of government workers out of work, research institutions, have to temporarily shut down. Things like supplemental nutrition programs have to be transferred to a local level. It's, oh my gosh. Everything from like TSA lines can get longer because a bunch of employees who work for like transportation and like Homeland Security have to be put on furlough. So it's just chaos. It's chaos for the government. And essentially, you just kind of have to sit there and wait. Like government officials are sort of put into, it's not lockdown, but it's kind of like informally, everyone is kind of like locked in DC until they pass a resolution. A fun fact is that the affair between like Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, I think, began during a government shutdown because a ton of White House employees had to be put on furlough during the shutdown. So they started bringing in the interns to help run kind of like day-to-day bullshit in the White House. And that's how Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton first met. So chaotic time, not fun. And the reason this shutdown might take place is because they're trying to pass a continuing resolution, but Trump, who again does not hold a government position right now, is pushing Republicans to attach a voting bill that would require voters to present proof of citizenship when they register to vote to the continuing resolution. And obviously that is an extremely controversial measure because it would make it exponentially more difficult for people to register to vote because, I don't know, like it's something like 1 in 10 Americans don't have proof of citizenship readily on hand, like a birth certificate or a passport of something of that nature. It wouldn't affect this election because it would take probably years for a system of that nature to be implemented. But Trump is demanding that they pass the SAVE Act. It's called the SAVE Act. Or like shut down the government if they don't get it passed. And he's using it to try and gin up fears that illegal immigrants, undocumented people who aren't citizens are voting in the election, which is not true. Yeah. But it's a double-edged sword because if Republicans shut down the government, they then could get blamed for it. And they don't necessarily want that in an election year.
So it's a sort of blackmail gamble every so often that happens where it's an opportunity to kind of blackmail the White House because the White House is worried if the government gets shut down that they'll get blamed, and the House is sort of going, well, we can make that not happen if we add this in. Yeah, it doesn't sound very smart, if I'm honest. Nikki, another quick money one. This is more good news,
I love money.
Talk me very swiftly through what the lower interest rates means, and basically, but Republicans are really annoyed about that.
Yeah, so obviously, if you've been paying any sort of attention to American politics, probably international politics, I think it's a global problem at this point. Inflation has been pretty high.
Yeah.
Like, inflation's a problem. Things are expensive. And the United States has the Federal Reserve, which is our central bank, which kind of controls monetary policy. It's independent from Congress, the presidency, like it's a whole independent body in and of itself. It's supposed to exist outside of the cyclical political nonsense that dominates this country. For the last year, a little more than a year, the Fed has refused to cut down interest rates. Part of that is because when interest rates are high, and this is my economics degree that I never use coming into play.
Nice.
When interest rates are high, it encourages saving. So people are spending less money, they're keeping more in savings, there's less money in circulation, there's less big investments, and that can theoretically help reduce inflation. the Biden administration has been slightly annoyed with the Fed for the last year because they really want to bring inflation down. Because when interest rates are high, it helps bring inflation down, but it also makes the cost of things like mortgages for your house more expensive, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So finally, on Wednesday, the Fed said they were going to do a 0.5-point interest rate cut, which is huge. Usually it's like a 0.25 point, like 0.25%. They went 0.5% on interest rates. And essentially what that signals is the Fed saying, okay, we're no longer worried that much about inflation because when you lower interest rates, more people are going to spend, there will be more investment, people will save less. So, you have more money in circulation that could lead to more inflation. But what they want to do now, what the Fed wants to do now is boost that investment to increase employment. So essentially what the Fed said is we're done worrying about inflation. We're now going to move to sort of a growth economy and like an investment economy. Weirdly enough, Republicans are furious about this.
But that's what they want, right? Surely.
You'd think.
Yeah,
You'd think that's
yeah.
what they want. But Trump was like, oh, this is political. One of Trump's advisors straight up called it like election interference because they didn't wait until after the election to do it.
Okay.
And they're like, oh, this is the Fed being political. But then again, it would probably be a more outright political for the Fed to say, no, we're going to wait until after the election to announce our monetary policy. The Fed is supposed to announce the monetary policy when the Fed wants to announce the monetary policy. So Republicans are mad about it. Again, it just goes to show their hypocrisy. It goes to show that they're not serious about these issues unless they can campaign on them.
Yeah.
But theoretically, this should be very good for Americans who are like looking to buy a home, small businesses, anyone who like has to make a big purchase in the coming years.
So, moving on to something slightly less serious. I mean, I'm quite mind blown away by this guy's the numbers guy, and you've got a fucking economics degree,
what the
which you've
hell?
really kept quiet, Nikki. So we need to throw more numbers your way.
Why have I been lumped with the
you're
numbers?
the numbers
Because
guy.
no,
I'm not
because
the
I
numbers
have
guy.
an economics degree, but like I'm not good at math.
Okay.
Oh.
Fair.
Like the only reason I passed that was because I'm like good at studying and like can like memorize things and forget them.
Yeah.
But I'm by no means an economist.
Okay, fair. Well, I've got a B at GCSE maths.
Good
so
job, man.
Maybe I am an economist. Finally, then, silly news, silly news. What is the state of the MAGA world civil war? Luma versus Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nikki. Where is that kind of left off? Because it was just Luma slinging a load of shit at Marjorie Taylor Greene last week. Is it kind of settled down? And, I mean, has Luma kind of won? Because it seems like Trump likes her maybe very much. Not slanderously very much, but maybe very much.
But maybe very much.
Yeah. Very much,
Good job,
maybe.
yeah.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
He likes her.
It's simmered down. I think
Oh.
Trump in a rally last week said that like she's a very nice person and I've known her for years and like blah blah. He kind of like he didn't really distance
friend-zoned
himself
her.
from her. Yeah. He
Yeah.
kind of friend zoned her.
Yeah.
But
Oh.
I don't particularly think it's of much consequence to the campaign. I think it was like an embarrassing public spat between two people who are in and of themselves embarrassing, like Greene and Loomer.
Yeah.
It kind of got kicked out of the news cycle by the assassination plot, everything else that's been going on. But again, I think it just goes to show that there is this ongoing tug of war between who gets to influence Trump. And even though Trump's advisors tell him like, no, you shouldn't have any sort of connections to Laura Loomer, she remains a gadfly buzzing about the former president. And she was there early on. She disappeared for a bit. She came back. She might disappear for a bit again. And who knows? She might come back. She has no formal role in the campaign.
No.
It seems that the relationship she has with Trump is entirely personal, allegedly.
Yeah.
But, I think there's 50 days left until the election. I don't think it's going to have much consequence. The damage seemingly has already been done.
Her formal role is being his very nice friend that he
That's right.
likes.
Oh,
Chris. So Laura Loomer actually as well. Chris ate dog food recently. So I think she
Tasty.
basically got paid to eat some sort of really good dog food and to showcase how good the dog food is. I mean,
you couldn't pay me.
No, force around that. Well, Chris, could we pay you? How much to eat dog food on the pod?
I live in London.
Wow.
And it's very expensive in London.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore,
are you about to tell me you have eaten dog food?
No, but I would take an amount.
How much?
Ooh.
10 grand.
I reckon. 10 grand.
5. Still, yeah.
Yeah, probably.
3.
I mean, it's not. I mean, no.
Depends on the dog.
5.
Food.
I think 5's the lowest I'd go. Really.
Really?
Yeah. What about you?
I think 3's got me. It depends how much dog food it is. But if it's just like a fork and you're saying 3 grand, that'd be stupid.
Wet or dry?
I am going. Again, depends on amount. If I've got to
dry.
eat if
I'd go dry because I would straight up puke if it was wet.
But it depends. If it's just a forkful, then I'm going wet. But if it's a bowlful, I'm also going wet. No, yeah, the other way around. If it's a forkful, I'm going dry. Just crunch it down.
Because dry, you can just like chew it up a bit, then wash it down with water. Like
wet,
I don't know,
wet
Yoda,
just slops. You just go.
The prince here eats a can of wet food a day, and literally, if it even touches my hands, I'm like.
Here on American Friction, we bring you all of the arguments that matter.
Yeah. And you can sponsor us with dog food.
Yeah, if you want.
We'll eat it.
We'll take it.
So yeah,
5 grand.
thanks.
You'll eat it.
Chris, we did some numbers earlier, but let's do some numbers earlier again. I'm really enjoying just going, Chris, today at you, even though you're right next to me. Chris!
Shouting at me.
So let's do some more numbers. I guess you've got to do some different numbers to the usual numbers because you did the usual numbers earlier in the numbers bit.
Yeah.
But so money's a big thing, obviously, isn't it? Where is fundraising at the moment?
Well, I think when we last... Lovely. Very good. Anyway... I think when we last spoke, it was quite even, but that was when Harris had kind of first joined the race, and she had that massive that spell where she rose a lot of money very quickly, and it was fairly even back then. But now, what we're looking at is Harris. I'm going to read the numbers here in full. She's on 770,382,436 raised in her campaign overall. It's a lot of dog food. And Trump, 574,480. That's wrong. Trump, $474,489,303 in his campaign. So it's Harris has raised a lot. And a bit more than Trump, but Trump has still raised a lot.
It's still a lot of dog food. Is there any other weird numbers you want to talk me through just before we go?
I thought I'd do the Fox News poll.
Okay.
You like a bit of Fox News, don't you?
I do.
So at the end of August, Fox had Trump at 50% and Harris at 49%. But that has now switched,
Foxy.
and Harris... the latest polls shows that Harris has a 2 percentage point lead over Trump, which is the first time since June that Trump hasn't been leading, according
since the
to
film
Fox.
came out.
What film?
June.
I said June.
Oh, okay.
You're an idiot.
Talking about Fox News, actually, let's bring it to an end. But a number I want to talk about. We were in the Politics Britain chart of podcasts. We were at 15. Tucker Carlson, 16.
Yeah,
so eat my fucking dust.
Dog food.
Tucker, you're behind us. Yeah, that's right. And I am going to steal your bow ties if I ever see you around here.
I don't think you suit bow ties.
No.
Actually, I'll take that back. You would.
Yeah. I wore one at a wedding not long ago.
Did.
So
you would.
I'll post a picture for the fans. Anyway, that brings us to the end of American Friction. Nikki, thanking you. Chris, and thanking you, Chris.
Everyone's thanking me this week. It's great. Thanks. Thank you both.
That's
and
very
you, Chris.
good. And Chris, thank someone else.
Listeners, I'd like to thank you. Thanks for being here with us. And if you want more, we're out with a new episode every Friday, early afternoon if you're in the UK, and in the morning if you're stateside.
You can also follow us on Twitter or X, but we don't call it that because bloody Elon Musk. Instagram and TikTok. Our name on each platform is @AmericanFrick. That's @AmericanFric. They wouldn't let us have friction. It was too long.
Yes.
So we're @AmericanFrick. And a quick reminder, if you enjoy what we're doing, please do go down into your app, rate and review us wherever you're listening to the show, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. You've been listening to American Friction. We'll see you next time.